Hey and welcome back to Fanfic Reading. Today we are reading CPNE, Team Champagne. We will be picking up where we left off.
Chapter 4. If I hold my tongue, I'll never lose my voice. Neapolitan sat on her bed and looked over her battle costume, sighing sadly. Emerald glanced over at her, head canting to the side. "Hey Neo, what's the matter?" She looked up from her outfit, pouting perhaps just a bit too overdramatically. "Between everything with Cinder and Shnee's class the other day, my clothes have taken some serious damage. I want to get them fixed up, but I don't have nearly enough lean to make it happen." To her surprise, Seal perked up with a bright smile. "I can help you. I'm quite skilled at sewing. But I don't really have any appropriate supplies with me. Now that the CCT is operational again, I've been meaning to go into town to contact my parents. Would you like to come with me? While we're out, we could purchase what we need to get your combat gear back in shape." On the one hand, getting her precious clothing back in respectable condition was important to Neapolitan. But she wasn't sure if taking a trip into the city with Seal was the most enticing proposition. She had shown herself to be competent and occasionally interesting. Hell, she'd even been willing to get drunk with him. And she wasn't half bad as a captain either. But as a person, they were so different. Neapolitan wasn't sure they could actually get along, especially when it was just the two of them. But she needed her clothes fixed. It was of the utmost importance. "Yeah, okay. I'm craving some food that isn't mass-produced in a cafeteria anyway." She glanced over at Emerald, who was currently giving her a look. Neo just shrugged with a cheeky smile as she and Seal left the dorm and made their way out of the school. "So, you know about sewing and junk? When your parents are hippies, you spend a lot of time doing things in a more old-fashioned way. Either because it's green, or because capitalism is the devil, or just to stick it to the man. Mom helped me make my outfit from whatever simple fabrics we could find, stitching it together with an old-fashioned foot pedal sewing machine. So I suppose I would just like to say that I understand wanting to keep your clothing in good condition. Mine is a reminder of how much my parents support me even when they don't understand me." Neo moved with her away from the school and along the path into the city in contemplation for a moment. It was weird not only to have Seal reveal a part of herself, but to find herself feeling a connection to her. "It might sound weird, but those clothes were the first nice thing I ever owned. Growing up without parents on the street, I never really got to own things. There was just stuff I could get away with using. But after I hooked up with Roman, that was his gift to me, something to make me feel like less of an urchin." She could see that Seal was having a little difficulty choosing her words. "I'm sorry. Maybe this is presumptuous. You don't have to explain yourself. But I thought you were no longer fond of Roman. Why does his gift mean so much to you?" "Yeah, Roman is kind of a scumbag," she signed with a little chuckle. "But in this case, those clothes don't make me think of him. Exactly. You can't really be yourself living on your own, not owning anything, not having any direction, just surviving. Having something that was just mine, only for me, that was the first time I really understood who Neapolitan was. Maybe it's shallow, but the clothes really do make the woman in my case. It would be rude of me to judge you. I can't know what it was like for you to put that outfit on for the first time. If it makes you feel more like yourself, then I just have to be certain I give this repair job my very best." Seal smiled brightly at her, and perhaps for the first time Neo actually felt like Seal was more than just an acquaintance or a team member. Not that she would dare ruin things by admitting as much. But she thought it, and that was enough for now. The people at the hobby store knew Seal by face and name despite the fact that she couldn't have been in Vale for that long. It was dorky, and maybe kind of sweet. But mostly dorky. "Oh, Miss Soleil. Are you here for more thread already? I know they work those students at Beacon pretty hard, but you were only here a week ago." "No, Eunice, thank you. I'm actually helping my teammate this time." Granted, Seal had a way of talking like an old woman sometimes. But in this moment, Neapolitan actually forgot for a second that she and her captain were the same age. She could have passed for a youthful grandma. "Oh, what a sweet young girl you are. If only everyone your age could be so considerate. Well, take your time and let me know if you need anything." The two girls stepped down an aisle, and immediately poor Neo felt utterly overwhelmed with the realization that the world of mending clothing was much more intense than she ever would have imagined. Special scissors, various kinds of needles, thread and colors she didn't even know existed. so we'll need white thread, dark brown, and some of this pink here. Neo stopped her as she went for the third color, reaching for a different one a few spools over. If we're doing this, we're doing it right. The shade of pink needs to be perfect. She held it up to her hair for reference before passing it back to her with a little nod. Out of all the silly things that she'd done to make Seal stumble or blush or go goofy, she never would have expected that one-upping her on color theory would be the thing to trip her. But the poor thing was actually blushing a little as she took the third spool from her, quickly turning away and moving further down the aisle. And probably also something to polish up your corset and those boots. As you say, we ought to do it right. A shared interest in sartorial finery probably shouldn't have been enough to affect either of them. But Neo could definitely detect a hint of something new as she and Seal made their way toward the CCT center. Their chatter was both more animated but also came in starts and stops. Seal's face was tinged with more red. However, Neapolitan's theory about all of this shifted somewhat when the two of them sat down at a terminal and called up the girl's parents. She was starting to think that maybe at least a part of her embarrassed awkwardness was having someone see the vast difference between herself and the people who spawned her. Sure, you could see the similarities here and there, dark skin and blue hair and those little forehead markings. But everything else about them was so stark. There's Mama's little baby. Seal's mother looked quite a lot like her, only with longer, more unruly hair and much looser clothing. Glad to see you are not dead, Beta. Still, we heard about the trouble with your communications out there, and knew we might not hear from you in a while. Her father was even more of a conundrum, a mountain of a man with an impressive belly. But it was clear from one look at him in his floral shirt and homemade jewelry that he was basically a big teddy bear. Is this the robot girlfriend you were telling us about? She's a cute one. Oh my god, I'm meeting your parents before Penny is? Seal, she's going to be so upset. Neapolitan knew there was no reason to dig in like that, but she couldn't help herself. And judging by the look of confusion on their faces, Seal's parents didn't know sign language like she did. No, you guys, this is Neapolitan. Penny's the one with red hair and green eyes. Yep, her face was burning hot now. Her father roared with laughter, slapping his knee. Right. The criminal. Nice to meet you, young lady. He finally seemed to connect the dots to her hand motions, and foolishly brought his hands up to his mouth, talking louder now. Nice to meet you. The poor girl covered her face in embarrassment, groaning shamefully. She's mute, not deaf. We've been over this. Giggling, Neo finally decided to give her a break and retrieved her scroll to type out a message they could hear. Nice to meet you too, Mama and Papa Soleil. Don't worry, we're taking good care of your daughter, and mostly keeping her out of trouble. The two on the screen were both chuckling now, and Neapolitan had to admit that it felt good to be on nice terms with someone's parents. That was a new sensation. Okay, well anyway, it was good talking to you too, and now that the CCT is back up, I'll be sure to call more often, and I love you and goodbye. Seal quickly shut down the feed and turned back to Neo with a hangdog expression. Can we go get food now? Say the words again, because I'm finding it really hard to believe. Neapolitan signed as she sat down across the table from Seal. Seal sighed and hastily took one of the paper bags from her, dragging it across the table and opening it up. I've never had a burrito. How is that so hard to believe? Vacuo and Atlas both have climates that aren't really good for creating popular, interesting foods. I've always been content with simple foods. Sister, there is no food more simple than the burrito. You just toss a bunch of perfect ingredients inside and wrap her up tight. It's compacted delight. Neil unwrapped a portion of the foil and dug in. Seal followed her lead, about to take a bite before looking back across the table at her warily. You made sure they didn't put any onions on this, right? Yes, dude, I know you're allergic. I got you. One of the things about being nonverbal that Neo kind of enjoyed was the fact that she could talk with her mouth full, and it wasn't rude. Very few people could say that. Seal shrugged and finally chowed down like a normal person. You could instantly see the change in her face as she took a few more healthy bites, causing Neo to chuckle softly. Sorry for doubting you. I'm always so paranoid about my throat closing up and suffocating. I prefer being able to breathe. Hey, you don't have to worry about anything. Me and Em, we got your back. We turned on everyone who ever meant anything to us. It's just us now, and that means you're our new family, like it or not. And we look after family. Okay. Neil hadn't meant to get quite so serious, and Seal clearly hadn't been expecting it either. Finally, her smile bloomed after a moment or two, and they went back to eating their burritos in peaceful silence. When they got back to the dorm, Emerald and Penny were out. Not in a mood to do actual homework, Seal sat down with her impromptu sewing kit and Neo's clothing on the floor. Neapolitan sat down next to her, getting comfortable and watching as she did her magic. Unlike the others, Seal really did not talk unless she felt it was necessary. It was oddly comforting, as was the visual imagery of her slender hands working the needle over and over again, closing up each of the tears and fractures in the cloth. She wasn't an idiot. Neapolitan knew exactly what was happening. Aside from hanging out as a team, she'd spent one day with her team captain and was already developing a big stupid crush on her. This was nothing new. She'd already gotten her idiot feelings for Emerald. And then she had made a drunken comment about wanting to get into a fight with Yang so she could climb her like a tree, whatever that meant. And now she was being just as easily swayed by someone who was, frankly, far too good for her. Sure, those nerds in RWBY could make that kind of thing work. But Neapolitan wasn't a good person. She had ended up at this school because she was undeniably bad. And no amount of heroics could actually change that. People like her didn't really matter, but she was a part of this team now, and if she could at least be good backup for real heroes like Penny and Seal, then that would be good enough. You're quiet, Seal mused thoughtfully. Neo shot her a no-shit look, and she just chuckled softly. You know what I mean. Just trying to think of a good way to pay you back for all this. Fixing my stuff and all. It felt like a good lie, a safe lie. The kind of lie that was essentially true. Seal just shrugged, not even losing the pattern in her stitching when she glanced to see what Neo was signing. You didn't really have to put up with me today. But we hung out like regular teens, and it was nice. Got to see my parents briefly. Had a burrito for the first time ever. Besides, like you said, we're family. You don't keep score with family. Neapolitan hummed softly in agreement. That had never been her experience with family before. But she could get used to it. Whatever you say, Summy. Chapter 5. The History of Me is Incomplete. Seal yawned, stood on the edge of the cliff, and looked out over the vista before her. The emerald forest was beautiful, especially in the morning. The very early morning. Classes had been going well, but apparently the faculty was discussing things behind the scenes and determined that Team CPNE needed to at least go through a truncated version of the trial that everyone else had endured when they first arrived. So here they were, the four of them, along with Oshman, Goodwitch, and Schnee. The headmaster sipped at his coffee and reviewed some information on a tablet he was holding. The idea is the same. Those panels will catapult you into the woods. You must land successfully, locate your teammates, get to the other end, and retrieve the relic. You will doubtless encounter Grimm along the way, and it is up to you to determine when to fight and when to press on. Miss Soleil, it will be your job in particular to ensure that everyone in your team works as one, and you make it back here safely. There is no grade for this exercise. There is no judgment. It is a trial by fire, and you either succeed or you do not. Yeah, when you say land successfully. Emerald didn't get to finish her question as the panels flipped upward, vaulting the four of them into the sky on slightly different trajectories. Seal watched with some small amount of pride as Neapolitan opened her parasol to slow herself. Emerald utilized the chain on her weapon to swing between trees, and Penny fired off the jet boosters from her blades, each of them reaching the ground with presumed safety. Seal slowed her time stream and landed as gently as a leaf, immediately looking around to try and determine where the others would have landed. She couldn't call for them, as that might alert a Grimm. So she would have to seek them out quietly. She drew her weapon with the gun barrel constantly swaying in the direction of even the slightest sound. The hour was early, and the forest was dead silent. Seal forced herself to slow her breathing, certain that a single wrong move could easily spell death. That was when she heard a commotion not too far away and rushed to see what it was. Go figure, Neapolitan was the one making so much noise. Ironic, but fitting. Her teammate had the misfortune of landing right next to a Beowulf, who she was presently leaping at to kick in the face, then spinning midair to bash it with her parasol. The weapon remained shockingly dense, and Seal could never quite correlate that idea. Before she could even get a shot off, The Grim was already down on the ground taking a well-deserved coma, and Neo was brushing her hands with a confident chuckle. Hey, Sonny. Thanks for all the help back there. Things had been odd lately with Neapolitan. Ever since their excursion into the city of Vale to get supplies for clothing repair, she had been acting strangely. Seal had never had a perfect grasp of human interaction, and this was even more confusing. She was as cheeky as ever, but something in her mannerisms felt kinder lately. Seal had simply put it down to a growing familiarity between everyone in the team. So why did their interactions stick out to her so much more? You seem to have the situation well in hand. It would have been rude to interrupt. True. You can't cut in when the waltz is only half over. But I'll make sure to add you to my dance card. She signed with a wink. Again, it was puzzling. What Seal normally took to be simple jokes, she now wondered if perhaps they were something else, like veiled truths. But that kind of thing was for someone with better social awareness to figure out. She was mostly focused on being a good leader. Despite Seal's best intentions, they had to fight through more than a few creeps and a few other Beowulfs before they found anyone else. But she had to admit, there was also some method to the professor's madness. They hadn't really fought Grim before, at least not as a team. Just as she had seen during the tournament, Neapolitan had a surprisingly good handle on playing the forward role against enemies. She moved fast and hit hard, and her parasol was basically indestructible. And with careful use of dust and her semblance, Seal provided plenty of cover fire to make life difficult for any monster unlucky enough to cross their path. Suddenly, an Ursa came flying through a tree nearby, pushed along by a massive green beam that Seal couldn't help but smile at the sight of. Naturally, Penny could look after herself. A moment later, she came flying through the underbrush, sword swirling in massive arcs, and cutting the bear down flawlessly. My friends, I am glad to have found you. This forest is beautiful, but full of dangers. Oh, but Emerald isn't with us. We must locate her and get to the relic. Neapolitan snickered and nodded. Yeah, she's useless without me. It was instantly clear how much more efficient they were with Penny around. The lesson was probably somewhat on the nose, granted. But even running into an entire nest of creeps posed absolutely no issue for the three of them together. Seal had never considered herself much of a combatant, and even after achieving success during the Vital Festival, she still knew that her fighting abilities weren't as great as her peers. However, when she had others around to carry the weight, it was that much easier to think and plan. Just as they escaped from the area where the nest was, they heard a massive crashing sound and found Emerald in the midst of her own fight. She had a Beowulf wrapped up in the chain of her weapon, and she was throwing all her might into swinging it around like a flail, slamming it into a cliff wall. She turned and saw them approaching and gave a cheerful smile. Hey, I appreciate the audience, but this bugger is giving me some trouble. Do you mind? She grunted with effort as the Grim struggled against the chains, and she withdrew them before they broke. As it swung for her with its massive claws, Penny jumped in and blocked the attack with her circle of swords before launching all of them into its chest and pinning it to the ground where it dissolved in a mass of black goop. Salutations, Emerald. I hope you were not having too much trouble without us. Nah, I was doing fine until this uppity jerk decided to become more trouble than he was worth. Strange, Neapolitan said that you would be useless on your own. I was being facetious. Neo stopped signing suddenly, a look of shock crossing her face. Okay, I'm clearly spending too much time around you people if I'm using words like facetious. Ugh, kill me. Emerald clapped an arm around her shoulders, laughing brightly. It's our penance, dear. The price we pay for our wayward past. Finding the ruins actually turned out to be relatively easy. Based on the position of the sun and a general idea of where the ruins were, Seal knew where they needed to go. The trouble, unfortunately, was in the shape of a king Taija Grim. A massive snake, but instead of a tail, there was another snake. In some way, the poetic part of her mind knew that this was oddly karmic. Two beasts of opposing colors, stuck together, that had to work as one in order to survive. But Seal was less worried about poetry, and more concerned with living to tell the tale afterwards. She also knew that this was ultimately her time to shine. Yes, they could no doubt make it through this fight by the skin of their teeth. But she deeply believed that with clever strategy, they could do more than simply get by. The massive snake hadn't seen them yet, which meant they had a chance to get the drop on it. Penny and Emerald, I need the two of you to work together. Emerald, distracted with illusions, and Penny, you boost her. Get it to wrap itself around and around the pillars. Neapolitan, they'll be needing you on defensive duty. If either head catches on, I want a wall between it and them. If things get dire, I'll provide some time bending and cover fire to give you all the edge you need. Those fangs can pierce steel, so don't play any games. Have each other's backs. Team CPNE can do it. Surprisingly, everyone just nodded and got to work. For some reason, Seal still expected her teammates to give her some measure of pushback. But they really did trust her judgment. It was a startling experience. Penny and Emerald fired off their semblances as one, and while Seal couldn't see it, she could still witness the effect as both ends of the snake roused and started sliding off in different directions to investigate something encroaching on its territory. She and Neapolitan stood nearby, weapons at the ready, prepared to move and shift tactics if need be. She hadn't accounted for the fact that the pillars they were working with were finely aged and rather brittle. As the Taijutsu realized its predicament, it began coiling and uncoiling its myriad muscles, and the pillars crumbled to dust. Damn! That's all right, they still haven't dash. Just as she was about to mention the fact that they were still incognito, both heads turned simultaneously to look in their direction. Damn! Oh, okay, The four of them had to dodge out of the way as the twin maws fired out and snapped at them. Seal threw up her hands and brought the snake Grim to a crawl. Neo! Pick a head and split up. Get this thing pulling in opposite directions. They did as commanded and, with only a nod of communication between them, ran off creating as much of a distraction as they were able. Still holding the Grim, even as her nose began to bleed, she looked over at her partner. Penny! Full charge on your beam cannon. Cut it in half. Penny drew her swords and swung them around in a circle as the green ball started to glow in the center. Exactly in half? That kind of precision may not be possible. Just eyeball it. We don't have to do this perfectly. Seal grimaced as her power began to fade, and the snake started fighting itself more viciously to attack one of the two pests invading its personal space. Oh! Of course, sorry. A bright green glow filled the area, and the Taijutsu was severed. Seal released her hold on it, suddenly passing out as green faded to black. When she came to, Seal found herself lying in the middle of the ruins with her head resting in Penny's lap. Emerald and Neapolitan were nearby, and all three of them were watching her with serious concern. Seal Soleil, you gave us all quite a fright. Yeah, what the hell, kid? I know we all appreciate the backup you gave us, but we're not really gonna make it very far if our captain collapses because she was overloading her damn semblance. Emerald was being harsh, but Seal knew it was from a place of love. Or at least, something resembling love. I swear, I'm gonna cover you in bubble wrap if I have to. Neapolitan's eyes looked a little bit misty, and again, somewhere in the back of Seal's mind, she had a few questions. But now was most definitely not the time. Seal groaned as she sat up, her head pounding but otherwise unharmed. Thanks, everyone. It was foolish, I know. But I didn't want to give you such dangerous orders and not be prepared to help you. She noticed that Emerald was holding something and nodded at it. Did we find our relic? She held it up with a satisfied smile. Yeah. A black bishop. Not sure why, but it feels right. Appropriate. Emerald passed it off to her, and Seal hefted it in her hand for a moment or two. Yes. It feels fitting. Chapter 6. Deliver me from my friends. Chapter text. Emerald hadn't been able to swipe her entire bar when they moved to Beacon, but she had at least managed to hide away a few bottles of the more choice material for a special occasion. This felt like a special occasion, or at least a dire enough one, that she needed to share a drink or two with her partner. So she gathered up a bottle of some particularly strong Mistral wine, 2 plastic cups, and Neo, before dragging her out into the nearby hills to get some alone time. Neo was naturally suspicious, but not so much that she didn't still drink the fine liquid. Truth be told, Emerald wasn't looking forward to doing this either. But all that stuff that went down in the forest made it clear that something was off with Neapolitan. And the only way that CPNE was going to reach optimal teamwork was if they didn't hide things from one another. But it wasn't her place to out her partner immediately, so she would have to talk through it with just Neo first. Quietly, they each sipped wine from their plastic cups, admiring the beautiful sky and the clouds floating by. Emerald knew she could only put this off so long, and she sighed. So you actually gonna tell her, or just keep burying it deep down inside? 'Cause either way, you gotta make a decision soon. We did okay out in the forest, but I could see that you were way too focused on one team member over the others. Neil huffed and took a long gulp from her cup before setting it aside, signing in frustration. What are you talking about? We did fine. You were practically crying because Seal overworked her semblance for 5 seconds. You keep sneaking glances when you think no one's looking. I'm just asking you to own up to it and do something with it. They glared at one another for a while. It wasn't like this was new for them. They had fought before. But this was a new topic, that was for damn sure. Finally Neo gave a soft sigh, her head hanging. I mean, what am I supposed to do? You can't honestly expect me to bury it deep inside and just not think about it. No shit, of course not. But why not just talk to her about it? We already know Seal is open to the possibility of having more than one special person in her life. Because that shit only works for decent, good people. The reason those other girls can do it is because they're not awful. They love one another equally, and they don't worry about jealousy all the time. If I tried to do something like that, it would probably crash and burn. Emerald sighed softly and shifted closer, pouring both of them some more wine. Oh, come on! First of all, that kind of crap doesn't have a moral center to it. I have no doubt that there are shitty people that consensually date multiple people. And even if that weren't the case, are we really still kidding ourselves? We're not bad. Em sipped slowly at her wine, staring out across the open land at the horizon. Not sure we ever were. Desperate, maybe, and in need of shelter and all that shit. I'm not saying it didn't have moments where it was fun. But I could say the same thing about being here with all these losers. Neo gave as dramatic a sigh as she was able and drained her own glass much more quickly. Okay, so we're not bad. But you know what I mean? I'm Dash. I fucking swear, if you call yourself a street rat, I'm gonna haul back and deck you. We're heroes and huntresses now. We fight together with them. Hell, I'd say we're friends. So what's the problem? Emerald knew she was really starting to press her luck now, but she was getting legitimately frustrated with Neo. This was the same girl who seemed to always do everything she wanted with a cocky swagger and a cockier smile. Nobody understood her, and nobody needed to. With a change of costume, she could be or do anything. And now she was freaking out over some bookworm. There was a break in the conversation as Neapolitan stewed and pouted for a moment. It's because I'm clearly not good enough. Okay? Penny makes sense with her, robot and nerd. It also makes sense that she'd be into Weiss or Blake. But what's she gonna do with me, huh? There's nothing wrong with us fighting together because we do it well. But beyond that, it doesn't make sense. The wine was good, really damn good, and it broke Emerald's heart to have to ruin it. But obviously Neapolitan needed a wake-up call. She took her partner's cup from her hand and chucked it aside before crawling over and laying on top of her. Em hovered with her lips just an inch or two away, looking into her eyes almost sadly. It's not like we make sense all time. Love, hate, any emotion, it's not always gonna make sense, it just happens. You think someone's attractive, and next thing you know. Emerald pushed in, locking lips with Neo, vaguely aware of the insanity in trying to convince her girlfriend to hook up with another woman. They continued to kiss for a while, and Em started to get lost in it just as she was sure Neo was too. Finally, the girl beneath her wriggled slightly, breaking the kiss and tugging her arms free. What about you? This feels unfair. You should hook up with Penny or that Nora girl. Something. Emerald just shrugged and kissed her briefly again. Not interested. I'm a one-woman kind of girl. And the one woman I care about is looking wistful and sad. So I'll do what it takes to make her happy. What do you say? Just go and talk to her. And if it goes poorly, well, you know I'll be right here, ready to catch you. Just to make her point that she was serious, Emerald stood up and playfully kicked Neapolitan in the shoulder. Now get to it. The more you delay, the harder it gets. It didn't really help matters any that when they returned to the room, Seal and Penny were snuggled up together. Nor was it particularly fun having to pry Penny away and convince her to leave based on an obvious and thinly veiled lie. The android was definitely developing more human tendencies all the time. Because as soon as they had put some distance between themselves and the dorm, Penny stopped in place, crossing her arms and looking suspiciously at her. It is only the two of us now, Emerald. We are a team. Surely you can tell me the truth. It wasn't as if this was a catastrophic event that they had to keep a lid on. But it still felt weird to explain this when their teammates were elsewhere. Well, Neapolitan spent that day on the town with Seal a while back. And since then, she's been kinda. Penny nodded sagely, hand on her chin. Another has fallen under the hypnotic sway of Seal. She is truly a mystery. Emerald opened her mouth to say something snarky before realizing that Penny kinda had a point. Even if she didn't understand, she couldn't deny the results. She had, in her brief time at Beacon, attracted the attention of at least 4 girls. Just because she didn't fit the archetype didn't make it any less true. Yeah, she really is. Oh, we should go back. If they are discussing this, then we ought to be by their sides. Penny bounced ever so slightly, as she had a tendency to do when excited. It involves us. Really? What if it doesn't, I dunno, go well? I'd feel awkward. Penny shrugged, clasping her hands together in front of her. Well, the way that I see it, if the worst were to happen, then they would both feel bad about it for different reasons. And we might as well be there since our presence cannot surely make things any worse. But if I am being honest, Emerald, I do not think we need to worry. I know that Seal can be quiet, shy, but she is also in possession of a large heart. She draws others to her, and she welcomes them all. Penny motioned for Emerald to return to the dorm room, approaching the door slowly and casually opening it back up. Penny, Emerald, is that you? You may as well come in here. Neo is having difficulty conversing. With a sigh, Em made her way into the dorm and went over to where the others were sitting on the couch. She perched herself on the arm next to Neo, wrapping a comforting arm around her shoulders. Penny trailed after her and sat down on the floor in front of Seal, smiling patiently as ever. This might be my fault. I was pushing her to have this conversation, and maybe she wasn't ready. Finally, Neapolitan raised her hands and began nervously signing. No, you were right. I need to just do this. I'm not exactly thrilled to complicate things here, but... Well, Seal, you're awesome. You're a great leader and a shockingly kind person. Stronger than you give yourself credit for, smarter than you'd ever admit, and cute as hell. Emerald could see the smile starting to spread on her face and smirked in response. She seemed to be finding her footing again. I know you've already got 3 different people vying for your attention. But if you don't mind a 4th, I'm here. Seal looked shocked and her face was glowing. She looked from Penny to Emerald, grinning now. Thank you both for your help. I think you can head out for a while if you'd like. Perhaps we can watch a movie tonight as a team. Emerald hopped up and hooked an arm around Penny, directing her toward the door. You got it, Sonny. We'll give you 2 some space. She offered a charming wink for Neo before disappearing into the hallway, the door shutting behind them. Come on, Robo-Penny. I seem to recall we still have an entire checklist of human things you need to experience. I'm thinking dancing. Oh, I quite enjoy dancing. I mean dancing in a club. It's nothing like going to a school party, trust me. It was, Emerald reflected, strange how differently people reacted to certain situations. Neapolitan had been rendered temporarily incapable of speech by Seal, in part because the two had a budding romance. Emerald had absolutely no qualms about hanging out with Penny, watching as she analyzed those around her and used the data to become a better dancer, hooking in close to one another, laughing brightly. There was no confusion or misunderstanding here. She had developed a singular romantic attraction, and that was enough for her. But she was more than willing to have some shameless fun with her teammate. Even with only a short time to enjoy themselves, they had grown a bit closer and were laughing still as they made their way back across the city toward Beacon. Penny clutched her hands together behind her back and peered at Emerald with a puckish smile. So, this is all still rather new to me. Does this mean that we are emulating our friends in RWBY more? Emerald just shrugged and smiled back at her. No, not exactly. You and Seal, you care about each other deeply. I feel the same way about my girl. But otherwise, I'm not interested in romance with a bunch of people. It's not for me. But, I dunno, I like fun. I like dancing with you. I like fighting alongside Seal. I like looking at pretty girls. I think that's probably enough for now. You are different, Emerald Sustrai. But I think perhaps that is why I am glad to have you on my team. I will doubtless have many more questions for you in the future." Emerald chuckled and nodded in approval as they crossed out of the city and back into Beacon proper. She found herself thinking about the joke she'd made when they first moved in. Perhaps pushing their beds together wouldn't be such a bad idea after all. Chapter 7. Just Aluminum. Penny had her first ever nightmare. She did not enjoy it very much. In the dream, she relived the events of leaving the dance club with Emerald and returning to the dorm. However, rather than merely reclining on the couch together, Seal and Neapolitan were curled in on one another and kissing quite heavily. Dream Penny gasped, and Dream Seal looked at her over Dream Neapolitan's shoulder at her with a wicked smile. "I have plenty of real people in my life. I don't need a fake like you anymore." Penny's eyes shot open. She knew it had only been a dream. She was fully aware what they were, and had enjoyed several pleasant ones. But for some reason, the experience had left her feeling sour, and for just a moment she felt ill when she looked at Seal sleeping there next to her in the dim light. She was actually angry at her. The knowledge that those words came from within her own mind was no comfort at all. It just made Penny despise herself as well. She whimpered and wiped at her face, finding that she was actually crying. She inwardly cursed the scientists who had made her so lifelike. Why did she have these feelings? Why did she feel the ache in her heart? Why was she given working tears? This entire thing had started when she developed feelings for Ruby, and since then the complications had only become more complicated. Despite her best attempts to be considerate and quiet, Seal awoke and sat up with a sleepy look. "Penny? What's wrong?" Apparently realizing that her partner was feeling poorly, she pushed herself upright more and immediately wrapped her arms around her. Hey, it's all right. I'm here." Her voice was soft and sweet, nothing at all like Dream Seal, and it helped to remind Penny that the thing she'd seen was nowhere close to reality, even if that didn't completely erase the pain. "It is nothing. You should go back to sleep." Seal shook her head and nuzzled into her gently. You're upset. You don't have to tell me about it, but there's no sense in leaving you alone with it." That kindness only caused poor Penny's crying to return, and she hurried to burrow herself against Seal's shoulder. As promised, they said nothing further for a time, just laying there together, while Penny attempted to collect herself. Technically, she had an internal clock, but again, it seemed as though attempts to make her as human as possible even extended to the smallest details. With her emotions on high, she had absolutely no idea how much time was passing since she had woken up. She was not even certain what time of night it was, or time of morning, for that matter. But finally she found the strength to speak. "I had a terrible dream. You had, well, it was not really you. Of course. But the imaginary you that I had made up? You decided that since you had attention from normal humans, you had no need of me anymore." Seal gripped her a little tighter, though she didn't say anything right away. When she did finally speak, her voice came out as soft as ever. "Some people like to throw the word love around with a rather cavalier attitude. That has never been the case with me. I say it only about my family and the few friends that I have known for years. So I want you to understand how important it is when I tell you that. I love you, Penny." Seal kissed her cheek softly and helped to wipe away a few of her remaining tears. "I stand by what I told you when this first began. Some may see you still more as an android, others may simply choose to view you as a human. But I continue to adore you because you are more than either. You are Penny, my friend and partner. You helped me to become a better warrior when I had no confidence in myself. You are open and honest and caring. And incredibly cute." That final line broke the tension a bit and got Penny to actually laugh softly. The noise either woke their roommates, or was merely the point at which they decided that it was safe for them to make their attention known. "Hey, kids! I never thought I would be the one to say this, but we do have class in a few hours. Are you guys okay?" There was some light rustling from the other side of the room, and Emerald chuckled softly. "Neo says that Penny is a big dumb idiot if she thinks she's gonna get recycled anytime soon." Seal rolled her eyes and shared a small smile with Penny. "Well, we're all awake anyway. Perhaps you two would like to join us?" There was more shuffling, and suddenly the foot of their bed was occupied by a second cuddly pair. Penny knew that by this point, she should no longer be surprised by the emotions that her other teammates were capable of. But still she felt somewhat surprised to see the veiled looks of concern that Emerald and Neapolitan had for her. I am sorry for making you all worry about me. This is my first time experiencing a nightmare. It seems so very real. Emerald chuckled softly, hugging Neapolitan a little closer. Yeah, those things will mess you up good if you're not careful. But most of the time, they don't mean anything. It's just your brain being a jerk. You're awesome and Seal is crazy about you. I guess we all are in our own way. So don't even stress. Sharing one last look, Penny and Seal opened their arms and beckoned the other two closer. Despite the relatively small size of the bed, they obliged. Neapolitan and Emerald happily shifted up and nestled in between them, and they wrapped their arms around, linking their hands together. We should rest now. As you say, Emerald, we have class tomorrow. Yeah, don't remind me. When did I get so responsible? Emerald said in between yawns. Next, Team CPNE. Remember, girls, you can only do what your team leader tells you to. Miss Soleil, you can only issue orders. This is about tactical teamwork and leadership. You're at your strongest when you work together. The four girls yawned as a team, at any rate. Despite their best attempts, no one was able to fall asleep last night. Professor Schnee called forth a large glyph, and 3 Ursi Major appeared. They all braced themselves and looked back at Seal for orders. The Ursi, too, seemed to be waiting for orders from Winter, effectively forming a team of enemy combatants. Penny wished that Seal was allowed to actually join them in the fight. It felt as though a limb had been severed. But she could only give them orders, no more, no less. That meant no time dilation and no helpful cover fire. Still, Seal was smart, and Penny trusted her to make the right calls. She glanced back at her partner and smiled encouragingly. Seal seemed to snap out of whatever deep thought process she was going through and smiled back. These are Ursi Major. They're not going to be as easy as we're used to. Penny, you need to take the one there on the right. Hold nothing back. We need to thin out their numbers. If you feel yourself losing energy, don't be afraid to say so. Emerald, Neapolitan, work together to keep the other two busy. Take simple hits and pot shots when you can. But don't get too flashy. This might take us a while, and we need to conserve ourselves. Everyone drew their weapons and adjusted their stances. Ready? Go! With a word from Winter, the bears launched into action. As ordered, Penny immediately threw herself into the melee to take one of the bears away from the others. She could hear clashing nearby from where her teammates were keeping a tight rein on the 2 other Ursi. Just like Seal, Penny knew that they could handle themselves. But she also knew they were only human and eventually they would need help. She did not have time to linger here very long. Captain! Permission to activate beam cannon? Seal grinned. Permission granted, Huntress. Penny drew her swords in a tight circle, going for a more focused shot as she had done with Giant Snake Grim in the woods. The Ursa was coming at her, but the cannon wasn't fully ready yet. Penny! Dodge! The words hit her so naturally, and the command was so simple, she had no trouble moving out of the way of its attacks, giving her the needed edge to gather the remaining necessary energy and fire the beam directly up the center of the beast, slicing it in half as it dissolved into white mist. Good! Get in there and help the others. Just remember you won't be able to use your cannon for a time. The swords came back and began swirling around her body in a dangerous vortex as she went to the next Ursa. Chains! Penny, pincushion! Again, the commands came so fluidly, and it felt easy to follow them. Penny knew that could be dangerous in the wrong circumstances, but her faith in Seal was restored, if not bolstered, since last night. As ordered, Emerald distracted the Grim that she had been fighting with illusions, though Penny could only see the way its gaze followed some unseen source. It turned its back on them, and Emerald quickly lashed out to surround it with her chains. With a mighty tug, it was yanked down onto its back, leaving it vulnerable for Penny to drive her swords into its chest until it, too, dissipated. A sudden cry of distress from Neapolitan caught their attention, and Penny turned just in time to see her come flying at them. She gracefully caught her in her arms, earning her a grateful smile. She set Neo down to her feet, and while she was a bit shaky, she was at least upright. Despite their best attempts, the third Ursa was still looking pretty healthy. That was when the most shocking thing happened. Seal's next command. It's time! Mindfuck! All the gathered students gasped, but Neapolitan and Emerald couldn't have looked more pleased with themselves. Everyone, combine your semblances. Neo, surround the Ursa, keep it trapped. Penny, provide support. Do it. Penny retrieved her blades and returned them to her back. The others sheathed their weapons as well, so they could focus all their energies on the beast. She extended a hand toward her teammates, the strings providing them with the boost they needed. Neapolitan started building barrier after barrier around the Ursa, taunting it and goading it into striking, only for the Grim to discover it was like trying to break diamond. The Ursa was starting to go mad in its new cage, lashing out in all directions and finding itself trapped. That was when Emerald got to work, trying out a new strategy they had been developing. The theory was sound enough. If her semblance was capable of creating illusions within a person's mind, to the point that they could see, hear, even feel them, then with Penny's help she could take that a step further. If she could overload the mind with enough stimuli, if she could convince the target that they were dead, would they actually die? Penny couldn't be certain, only watching from the outside, but the Ursa was certainly in pain. Its paws went up to grasp futilely at its head. Finally, it let loose one last, deafening roar before a wave of energy radiated off its skull, practically an explosion, and it collapsed. As it disappeared, Neapolitan took down the walls of her semblance, all three of them running to give Seal a big group hug. That was amazing! Penny cried. Winter adjusted herself slightly now that the fight was concluded, looking the four of them over. Well, you certainly have a surprisingly fine grasp of teamwork. Your command terms could use some alteration, though. I must admit, I'm surprised, Miss Soleil. I hadn't expected language from one such as yourself. Well, Seal coughed nervously. It's the captain's job to know how to command their team. I have to be able to issue orders in a timely fashion, using terminology that they are familiar with. Can you truly blame me? Their instructor gave another dramatic sigh before turning to look at her sister and teammates. Team RWBY, you're up next. The no fighting rule goes double for you, Fall Maiden. I don't even know how my powers work. Why does everyone act like I have this amazing edge? I'm still Ruby. I spilled syrup on my skirt just this morning. It's true, I saw it. She was traumatized. Seal said softly as they went back to join the other students, ready to cheer on their friends. One arm gently looped around Penny's shoulders, another around her back. Penny assumed that it was Seal, so she was shocked to look and see that it was Emerald and Neapolitan holding her gently as they all recovered from the intense fight. It helped to provide some closure to things, getting closer to the two of them. It was hard to worry too much about Seal being taken from her when she was just as fond of Neo and M. Chapter 8, We All Have Taboos. Neapolitan had sort of assumed that, since she and Emerald were just popping into town for a few short errands, it was going to be a quiet day. That had been a foolish assumption. Granted, it started off easy enough. Penny and Seal were off with the dorks from RWBY, and the two of them were bored enough that getting breakfast in the city sounded like a good time. Ugh, how had they been tamed so easily? Breakfast really had been delicious, and filling, and wonderful, and all that stuff. But it was also a stark reminder that Neapolitan was running low on lean and needed more. This felt doubly true because she was never sure when someone might suddenly descend from the constabulary to steal all her ill-gotten gains away from her. They might have had someplace to live, and a life to lead. But there was no allowance to go with that. So they mostly had what they brought with them, and what spare change either girl felt comfortable pickpocketing or grifting. But Neo at least had the brilliant thought to put some of her funds in the bank, and since they'd been getting constant morality injections, they just didn't feel right stealing money anymore. They were standing in line together and shooting the shit, making sure to chat through sign language to avoid pissing anyone off. They had discovered the hard way that sometimes what they considered engaging conversation was not polite for others to hear. So signing and giggling it was. Come on, you gotta spill at least a few details. I told you how things went with Penny out at the club. Yeah, where all you did was just dance a little. And I'm telling you, all Seal and I did was hang out on the couch. We kissed like once. Boring. Something seemed to catch Emerald's attention, and her eyebrows went up. That, on the other hand, is not boring. A cadre of strange-looking people walked in through the front door, and it didn't exactly take much work to put together that their covered faces and poorly concealed weapons meant this bank was about to be robbed. They had precisely 10 seconds before the shit hit the fan. Without warning, Emerald lifted Neapolitan into her arms and jumped up to the second level of the bank, hunting down an empty office where they could hide out. Okay. Emerald started to speak out loud before catching herself and switching back to using sign language. They were officially in stealth mode. What do we do? I mean, it wasn't that long ago we were the ones robbing people. There were some bangs below, and one of the robbers fired off his gun as a warning, and they started herding everyone out of the way. All right, folks, this should be over quick if you all just cooperate. Neapolitan gave her most comforting smile at Emerald. Yeah, but we have auras and semblances. Even without our weapons, we could take them on no problem. Probably. But they're collecting hostages now, which means we can't just go shit riot. I mean, well, we could, but I've been developing this nasty habit of having a conscience lately. Em looked embarrassed to admit that, and Neo didn't want to let her feel alone. Me too. Stealth it is. Neo poked her head out of the office and noticed one of the thieves coming toward their hiding spot. Shit! Got a guy looking for stragglers. What's the plan? Emerald just grinned at her, still rooted where she was. We stay right where we are, and we keep signing. If he finds us, I need you to play the scared deaf girl con. If he doesn't find us, then they're really idiots, and this will be easy. Are you sure? We can handle ourselves, but the bank was good and busy today. That's a lot of fleshy people to get shot up with bullets if we're not careful. She took a slow breath and sighed softly. She was the tank. That had been decided some time ago. That meant protecting the people was her job. Emerald could take the charge on distraction and misdirection. Which means we have to be flawless. Hey! Neapolitan only just remembered that she was supposed to be deaf and kept herself from flinching when the masked gunman walked in on them. Got two more up here. Emerald made a few more signs at her that roughly translated to cigarette ankle nimble fish hook before turning her attention on the guard. Please, it's my sister. She's deaf and she was freaking out. I brought her into this office to catch her breath when all the noise started. The guy came around to get a better look at the both of them, staring hard at her in particular. Neo? Holy crap, Neo, what the hell are you doing here? Gasping, she decided not to give him a chance to let this conversation go any further. From the floor, Neapolitan vaulted up and swung around to the guy's back, hooking her arm against his neck and choking him out until he tumbled to the floor. As she pulled the body away from the windows to hide it under the massive oak desk, Emerald decided to momentarily break the no-talking rule. What was that? Roman worked with a lot of dudes. My best guess, this guy was one of those disposable third stringers who worked with me once or twice on missions. Either he was gonna want me to help them, or he was gonna ask too many questions about what I've been up to. I didn't need that. We didn't need that. Okay, well now that one of them is knocked out and hidden under a desk, that puts us on a ticking clock. Someone will recognize their numbers are thin, or they'll find him, and they'll want to know what's up. Emerald sighed and messed with her hair. I'm regretting trying to do this. Me too. But I think I have a plan. Slowly, carefully, silently, the girls crept along and found where the other hostages were being held down on the first floor. Okay, so here's the idea. I drop down and join the others. I put up as big a wall as I can to keep them safe, and maybe provide them with a chance to escape. While I'm doing that, all you have to do is make your way around the place and trick a few guys into wandering down corridors or shooting each other. Once I get the hostages secured, we can stop holding back and crack some skulls. In unison, the two of them reached out, gripping the other's head and bringing them together to touch foreheads. Team Mindfuck. Neil also stole a quick kiss before gracefully dropping down over the banister. She landed without a sound at the edge of the crowd, the woman next to her about to gasp before she clamped a hand over her mouth, shaking her head. Once it was clear she wouldn't make any more noise, she withdrew her hand and looked back ahead of her. The guards were all distracted with breaking into the vault, and already she could see one lone idiot being tricked down a hallway and off to the side. Neapolitan took her time, gathering herself, getting centered and focused. She made her way to the front of the group and made a silencing motion to all the hostages before putting up as powerful an illusory wall possible, wide and tall and solid as could be. No one quite understood what was happening except that they were dealing with some kind of hero, perhaps from Beacon. She knew how to make an escape, though doing so with an entire crowd was another experience entirely. She kept them moving slowly, but steadily, until they came to a back door, a fire exit. Neo went to open it only to be stopped by someone she assumed to be the manager of the place. That's going to alert them. They'll be coming for you. Knowing there was no point in signing or wasting time with her scroll speaker, Neo just nodded before kicking the door right off its hinges and out into the alleyway. She motioned for them to go with a strong pointed finger as if she were dealing with a dog, and they all started filing out. Already, another thief was coming down the hallway to check on the commotion. She ran directly for him, while running to avoid gunfire, then closing in with a roundhouse kick to the face. The time for subtlety had most definitely ended. Little help! Emerald just barely managed to yell out as she struggled with one of the other robbers, with the gun he was holding. The only thing around that looked even slightly useful was a crowbar that one of these idiots had left unattended. So Neapolitan grabbed it up and dashed over behind the big lug, bashing him over the head. It wasn't quite enough to knock him out completely, but it at least got him to split his attention between them. Something, presumably an illusion, suddenly caused him to look to his right, at which point the real Emerald delivered a heavy punch right at his kidney. More than enough to send him crumpling to the ground, writhing in pain. Neapolitan felt good for a moment, until she heard 3 more guns cocking behind them. They turned and saw the remaining robbers standing there with rifles trained on them. Hey there, boys. Look, here's the thing. Your captives are gone, your crew is currently down by half, and the cops are undoubtedly on their way right now. The guy who was presumably their captain suddenly turned on one of his 2 remaining buddies, aiming at his head, arms trembling. In no way. We worked together on this for weeks. If you was a traitor, I'd a known. The dude obviously had no clue what he was talking about, but the sudden spike in tension forced him to raise his own gun in return. Boss, what are you talking about? I ain't done nothing. Of course now, the third schlub was also aiming at the supposed traitor. Emerald couldn't help but laugh. He couldn't hear them now. He was in the middle of his own little imaginary world. I'm not going down for this, the boss man cried and shot him in the knee. The intention was that this would ultimately defuse the situation. Neapolitan was almost certain that her idea was not to set off a bomb of misunderstanding, as the 3 remaining robbers started to all fire on each other. The girls dove for cover as Neo threw up a barrier for them to hide behind, waiting for it all to die down. That was when they heard the sound of approaching alarms. Shit! Was all Emerald muttered. Neo glanced over at her, surprised to see just how shaken she appeared. Thank you, girls. I'll be sure to contact your professors about this. I'm sure you'd like for them to know what a good thing you did here today. The detective made a few more notes on their scroll before closing it up and pocketing it. Neapolitan really didn't want that. She wasn't sure she necessarily had any specific reasons for it. Only that she wasn't interested in attention, questions, curiosity, all of that stuff. It wasn't a moral thing, it was just a need to feel like she could still operate in the shadows sometimes. Neo liked the concept that she was her own person who could make decisions simply because she could. Emerald looked over at her as if asking for her opinion, and Neo quickly shook her head in response. Em actually looked pleased about that, and turned back to the detective. Thanks, but we're not really looking for accolades. We just made a promise recently to actually stand up to awful people. Okay. Well, you kids have my number. You can contact me if you need anything. If there's some kind of court case, you may be contacted, yada yada. He shrugged and left them to go check in with the other officers on the status of all the robbers. With everything coming to a close, the girls figured it was probably time to make their exit and get back to school. Neapolitan gave it a little while before deciding to address the strange thing she'd noticed at the end. Are you okay? Yeah, of course. Why wouldn't I be? That brief gunfight there at the end just seemed to rattle you a little. Neapolitan knew immediately that a deflection like that meant this conversation might not even happen. But she wanted to at least try and engage it anyway. Emerald was quiet for a moment. You know, I've killed people before. As I'm sure you have. But it sort of feels like I've really been sucked into the cult of heroics lately. I had this moment of terror that me using my semblance would lead to someone being killed. Like if I had just grabbed up one of their guns and shot them down, I could at least still live with that. But I was legitimately terrified of doing it accidentally. She gave a rather long, drawn-out sigh. Am I losing my edge? Unable to help herself, Neapolitan chuckled softly and gently bumped hips with her, making Emerald momentarily stumble as she started to laugh along. Dude, we just stopped a bank robbery with 0 casualties, and then didn't take credit for it. We have surpassed edges. We have transcended badassery. We're gonna be huntresses, after all. I like the sound of that. Thanks, Neo, she mused, leaning over to quickly plant a kiss on her temple. Chapter 9. Our life is just one big pun. Honestly, I would say your story was more or less coherent right up until the end there. Seal looked over her 2 teammates with a careful glance. I can believe that you stopped a bank robbery, but I can't figure out what would possess you to keep it silent. It would be a big help for your reputation, and it would probably go a long way to keeping Professor Shi off your backs. Emerald just gave a blasé shrug. Because that's not why we did it. And hell, I don't know, maybe I kinda like everyone assuming we're still gutter trash. Keep expectations low so we can shock the hell out of them when it really counts. Still, you have done something incredibly good, and I believe that calls for some manner of celebration. Penny clapped excitedly, bouncing up and down. Surely we can manage some kind of party. Neo sighed softly, and already Seal could feel the rejection coming. A party is sort of the same thing as getting recognition from the cops or the administration. Look, we did something good just because we wanted to, and I know that all I really care about is having that for my own private enjoyment. Nothing more, nothing less. She paused for a moment as that easy smile of hers began to return. Still, I guess if you wanted to treat us to dinner just because, I wouldn't say no to that. Huzzah! Penny cried, resuming her excited bouncing. True to their word, Emerald and Neapolitan never claimed responsibility for their heroics. The news could only report that a pair of students from Beacon had been the ones to take down the would-be robbers. Ojban and the other professors asked around a few times, but the girls never came forward, and Seal and Penny didn't have the heart to reveal the truth. Not even when 2 of the boys from Team CRDL said that they were the ones who saved the day. Their teammates would just laugh in private about how pathetic it was. Seal was having a great deal of trouble understanding at first, but finally she felt like she was beginning to see. Em and Neo were private people who had no interest in the public eye. They had switched sides with relative ease because they weren't really bad or good at heart. They were just chaotic. They did as they pleased, and everyone else could just go to hell. She respected that, and she would keep their secret willingly so long as it made them happy. Aside from that bit of insanity, things had entered something of a lull. Classes during the week, studying and relaxing on the weekend. They all continued getting to know one another. Even if Emerald insisted she was a one-woman kind of girl, it was pretty clear that she and Penny had really bonded during their trip to the club. Needless to say, RWBY weren't the only ones who could spread the love. Speaking of which, things reached their natural conclusion when CPNE found themselves on a date with RWBY. But rather than the obvious pairings, things were a bit more complicated than that. Ruby had a lot of things that she wanted to talk about with Penny. Neo showed incredible interest in burying the hatchet with Young, and Emerald willingly tagged along to help with translation. And that left Seal to be wooed by both Wise and Blake. For someone who was completely unused to attention, having 2 beautiful, intelligent women giving her this much focus was a little overwhelming. So, have you been adjusting to Beacon all right? My sister isn't giving you too much trouble, is she? Seal laughed bashfully, rubbing at her neck and looking down at her meal, which was going more or less uneaten. I think we finally reached an understanding with Winter after we caught her and Professor Goodwich being close. Which is to say, we never talk about it, she respects us, and we don't give her too much trouble. It's a tenuous relationship, but we're making it work. Blake laughed brightly, tucking a few strands of hair back behind her ear. Yes, I remember my first proper meeting with Winter was more than a little terrifying. But once you get to know her, she can be quite an engaging person. I doubt it will come as much of a surprise that Em and Neo don't get along with her as well as Penny and I do. But overall, she's been a marvelous advisor. She glanced around the table at the others with a wistful smile. And how are things going with your super secret project that I definitely know nothing about? While there was supposedly an announcement in the works from various leaders around Remnant, there were plenty of students around Beacon who had already heard at least a little bit about what was going on with the girls in RWBY. After all, quite a few of them had seen for themselves when Ruby was suddenly given the powers of the Fall Maiden. And given that Seal and her team had a good relationship with them, it didn't take long to hear about Ojban's master plan. Quiet, thankfully. Wise said with a rather tired exhalation. There was a week or so where all four of them were getting run ragged by their mentors. So long as the current maidens are doing their thing, we just have to focus on being totally normal students. Still, I guess we're all kinda nervous, waiting for the other shoe to drop. You know, there's a chance that something bad could happen to one of them, and we'd only find out when another one of us suddenly becomes a powerful demigoddess. Blake nodded in agreement. Besides, I'd like a chance to be around them for fun instead of training. They have so much to teach us beyond simply how to be a good maiden. Once she had managed to chew through a bite of her food, Seal gave a sympathetic click of her tongue. I don't envy any of you. Just studying to be a huntress is already a lot to deal with. The unspoken part of this was that Seal found herself rather intimidated by the other team. They were not merely overachievers, they were on some other level far beyond that. You could tell just by looking at them, they were going to save the world without question. And yet, still they seemed almost charmed by her nonetheless. It was baffling. Wise smiled cheekily at Blake before glancing back at her. Honestly, I think it's just that we all share the same character flaw. I don't even know what to call it. I won't be happy until everything is okay, which is probably impossible, so I'm constantly going at 100%, 24/7. Oh my god, right? Her teammate gently bumped shoulders with her, chuckling softly. Remember when I was trying to deal with all that white fang stuff myself? And you guys had to force me to stop for 2 seconds? Ugh, it's like a disease. Something about their reaction struck Seal as particularly powerful. It hadn't occurred to her before this point that her friend's heroic tendencies would have such major drawbacks. So how do you deal with it? The same way we did back then. We watch out for one another, and we keep it honest. If you have to do something dumb, don't do it alone. Blake had just begun a very sage nod when she caught herself, as if only just processing what she'd said. Oh my goodness, listen to me. Lecturing you like we're not in the same year. Obviously, if you find yourself on another path in life, you should follow it. The only thing we can do is give our best. Seal couldn't help but laugh softly at her sudden fumbling. No need to feel embarrassed. You've given me a great deal to think about. After parting ways with each other in the hallway, Seal and her team strolled back into their dorm. She yawned into the back of her hand and gave a little stretch. Strange, how much can happen in a year? Emerald scoffed as she made her way to her dresser, presumably looking for something to change into. More like what can happen in a week. A day? Things get crazy around here. Still, it is nice to take an evening and enjoy the moments of peace and quiet when they emerge, Penny added cheerfully. Despite the light attitude of the moment, Seal still found her mind whirling away. She hadn't even realized she had spaced out yet again until Neapolitan moved in front of her and waved a hand in her face. You still with us, Captain? I've simply been thinking more on the matter of the bank heist and your desire to keep things quiet. She cleared her throat softly and looked at the other three for a moment. I believe I finally understand. I realize that I have no interest in being like Ruby and her team. To be so constantly in the spotlight would be exhausting. I have more in common with you all than I initially realized. And I'm grateful to be your leader. I am legitimately looking forward to stirring up some chaos in the shadows with you. That had been difficult to get out, but Seal felt good to have finally said it. Foolishly, she assumed that would be the end of the matter and turned to locate her pajamas, only to be tackled by a hug from Penny before being subsequently dogpiled by Neapolitan and Emerald. Penny and Neo each pecked her on the cheek while Em ruffled her hair affectionately. Geez, nerd, any more of that, and you might actually get a tear out of this withered husk of a soul, she added with a low chuckle. Now get changed so we can watch a movie and snuggle.
And that's all for today, thanks for coming by and hanging out. I hope to see you next time.